My sister put me on the spot at her rehearsal dinner, then asked me to reveal my Navy nickname in front of everyone. The quiet hum of anticipation at the rehearsal dinner was shattered by a single, familiar voice. My sister's. She raised her glass, a mischievous glint in her eyes, and called out, "Tell everyone your Navy nickname." A wave of dread washed over me, a familiar sensation when it came to her particular brand of humor. Little did she know, this seemingly innocent taunt would unravel more than just my composure. Elara's smile was blinding as she held her champagne flute, her gaze fixed on me across the table. It was the same perfected smirk she'd wielded since we were children, honed over years to disarm and delight. She was already chuckling before the words even left her lips, before I could even formulate a reply. That, I knew, was the telltale sign of premeditation. "Go on," she pressed, "tell everyone your Navy nickname." 30 pairs of eyes turned to me. Leo's mother, his cousins from out of state, his business partners, and Chloe, Elara's maid of honor, whose lips were already pursed in an attempt to stifle a premature laugh. Even the banquet manager by the door had stilled. And then, across the room, though I didn't fully register him until later, a distinguished man with silver hair and a ramrod straight posture had paused mid-sip, watching me with an expression I couldn't yet decipher. My sister radiated pure joy. Her white dress shimmered, her soft curls framed a triumphant face, and the champagne bubbled in her glass. She'd meticulously orchestrated every detail of this weekend, the venues, the menus, the seating charts, the toasts. Every single element had been carefully calibrated, including this moment. "Oh, come on," she insisted, louder this time. "Don't make it awkward." There it is, I thought. It was her classic maneuver, back someone into a corner, then blame them for being trapped. I simply folded my hands on the table and spoke one word, "Riptide." To understand any of this, you need to know a bit about Elara and me. We grew up in a small house in the heart of Ohio, a house perpetually too cramped for the emotional storms our family brewed. Our mother, Eleanor, a paralegal, believed above all else in maintaining peace, even if it meant sacrificing honesty, fairness, or her own well-being. Our father left when I was 9 and Elara was 12. After that, preserving the facade of a happy family became Eleanor's singular focus. Elara grasped this dynamic early on. She quickly learned that a well-timed smile and a swift deflection of blame could often shield her from any repercussions. She was naturally charming, quick-witted, and beautiful, making it easy for people to believe her. Teachers, boyfriends, distant relatives who only saw us during holidays, they all fell for it. I, on the other hand, was the stubborn one. The one who couldn't let things go, who complicated matters by refusing to pretend everything was fine. By the time I was 17, this dynamic had a name in our household, Serena being difficult. I joined the Navy at 19. Not out of desperation, I had a partial scholarship to Ohio State, but because I longed to belong to something that demanded my authentic self. No pretense, no maintaining appearances, just hard work, competence, and truth. The Navy gave me that. It also gave me my nickname. My first deployment was aboard the USS Liberty, where I worked as an aviation bosun's mate. We were the silent choreographers of the flight deck, a place renowned as the most perilous working environment outside of active combat. There's zero tolerance for hesitation on a flight deck. You learn to interpret situations before they fully unfold, you learn to move instinctively. My chief, a 12-year veteran named Chief Miller, started calling me Riptide about 4 months in. I once asked him why, as he casually ate a breakfast burrito. He barely glanced up. "Riptide doesn't fight the water," he said, chewing thoughtfully. "It is the water. You can't see it coming, and you can't stop it once it's there." He took another bite. "That's you." The name stuck. For the people I served with, it wasn't a joke. It was an acknowledgement, a concise way of describing something they'd watched me earn. But Elara had only heard the word "Riptide" once, 3 years ago, when I'd foolishly mentioned it during Christmas dinner. She'd laughed then, too, claiming it sounded like a character from a cheesy soap opera, accusing me of always being so dramatic about military stuff. She never bothered to understand what it meant. She didn't want to. And now, she'd decided to turn it into a punchline at her own rehearsal dinner, in front of her fiancé's family, in a room full of people who, she assumed, would laugh because she was the bride, and brides, in her world, commanded the room. I knew this because I knew Elara. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Arthur Maxwell sat across that room, and the word "riptide" carried a very specific, profound meaning for a former Navy medic from an entirely different generation. The laughter erupted the moment the word left my mouth. Elara's bright, performative chuckle was first, then the ripple spread across the table. Leo's cousins, a few of his colleagues, even Chloe, who offered me a quick, apologetic glance even as she smiled. Riptide, Elara repeated playfully. That sounds like a rejected superhero name. More laughter. Someone at the far end echoed, Riptide. What were the other options? Elara continued, clearly thriving in the spotlight, riding the wave of 30 people's attention. Commander. Captain Spreadsheet. The table roared with appreciation. I remained still, hands folded, shoulders level, face neutral. The Navy teaches you that, too. There are moments on a flight deck when everything unravels simultaneously, the wind shifts, a cable snags, an aircraft's trajectory becomes suddenly, catastrophically unpredictable. In those moments, the worst thing you can do is let your body betray your panic before your mind has solved the problem. So, you learn stillness. You learn to let the storm rage around you while your mind works. I was doing that now. My mother's hand found my forearm under the table. She leaned in, whispering, "Just let it pass." I turned my head slowly to look at her. "Why?" I asked quietly, "is that always my job?" She didn't answer. She never did. An honest answer would require admitting that letting things pass had been her strategy for 30 years, and that it had cost both of us things we couldn't yet name. Elara was still going, now leaning into Leo's shoulder, using him as a prop in her performance. Can you imagine they actually called her that? She shook her head in exaggerated disbelief. The military is just so, that's when I heard it, a glass gently touching the table, soft and deliberate, the antithesis of accidental. I looked across the room. The older man with white hair had set down his water glass. Both hands now rested flat on the table, and he was looking at my sister with an expression I could only describe as recognition. Not of her, but of something she'd said, something she'd just unwittingly revealed about herself. I still didn't know who he was. I'd been introduced to at least 40 members of Leo's extended family and professional circle over the past 24 hours, and the names had blurred into one. But I noted his posture, militarily straight even in his 70s. And I noticed his face had gone very, very still. Not confused, not offended, but recognized. He pushed his chair back. The scrape of wood on the polished floor cut through the laughter like a knife. Every head turned. The man rose slowly. He wasn't tall anymore, age has a way of compressing people. But when he stood, the entire room seemed to rearrange itself around him, a phenomenon that had nothing to do with height and everything to do with something else, something that those who have dedicated their lives to service carry in their bearing. He looked directly at my sister. "Apologize," he said. The word landed in absolute silence. Elara blinked, champagne glass still raised, her smile still in place but now frozen, confused. "What?" she managed. "Apologize." His voice was calm. It didn't rise. It didn't crack. There was no theatricality, no performance, no anger. And I think that's what made it so terrifying. Anger you can dismiss. Calm like that, you cannot. Elara forced a laugh. "Uncle Arthur, come on. It was just a joke." Uncle Arthur, Leo's uncle. I mentally filed that away. "No," Arthur said. "It wasn't." Elara's eyes darted around the table. It was a reflex, her lifelong habit, the "find an ally" scan. She was searching for a face that would smile back, for someone who would laugh, break the tension, and make everything okay. She scanned 30 faces. No one smiled. Not Leo, he was looking at his uncle with a dawning understanding. Not his parents, who had gone rigid in their chairs. Not the cousins who'd been snickering just minutes before. Not Chloe, who was suddenly deeply engrossed in her salad. Elara was alone in the middle of the joke she'd created. "I didn't mean anything by it," she said, her voice smaller now, a register I hadn't heard since childhood, before she'd learned that volume could substitute for vulnerability. Arthur's jaw tightened. That, he said, is what people say when they want the damage without the responsibility. Leo shifted in his chair, leaning slightly toward Chloe, who was 2 seats away. Chloe, he said quietly. Did Alara plan this, before dinner? Chloe went pale. The word, planned, hung heavy in the air between them. Chloe, Leo's voice was careful, a plea. Chloe looked at Alara. Alara's eyes met Chloe's across the table, and I watched a silent, swift conversation pass between them. Don't. Don't you dare. I'm asking you as your best friend, as the woman whose bridesmaid dress you already paid for. Don't. Chloe looked down at her plate. Then she said it anyway. She said the Navy nickname bit would kill. The table went cold. Not quiet, there's a difference. Quiet is an absence. Cold is a presence. Cold is 30 people simultaneously processing the same information, arriving at the same conclusion, and nobody wanting to be the first to voice it. Alara's face cracked. It happened in stages, like something breaking under immense pressure, not all at once, but in a sequence. First, the smile vanished. Then the tension left her shoulders. Then, something behind her eyes shifted from performance to genuine panic. Leo stood up slowly, not dramatically. He didn't forcefully push his chair back or knock anything over. He simply rose from his seat, the way you do when you've made a decision and need your body to confirm it. He didn't shout. He didn't look around to see who was watching. He wasn't doing this for the room. I need a minute, he said. You're walking out? Alara whispered, taking a minute? During our rehearsal dinner? He looked at her. Not with anger, and I think that's what truly undid her, the absence of anger. Just something quiet and final, the gaze of someone reassessing everything they thought they knew. Because I don't want to say what I'm thinking in front of everyone, he replied. Then he turned to me. Serena, I'm sorry. He followed Arthur out of the room. The door closed softly behind them. Alara stood at the front of the room, her dress perfect, her hair perfect, champagne glass still in her hand, though it had ceased to be a prop and was now just something she held because she didn't know what else to do with herself. The room no longer belonged to her. I've thought about that moment often since then, what it looks like when someone loses a room. It's not what you'd expect. It's not dramatic. It's a kind of subtraction. One by one, without moving, the people around you simply cease to be your audience. My mother had her hand over her mouth. I don't know if she was horrified at Alara, or horrified at herself for all the years of, just let it pass. Alara turned to me, and for the first time that entire evening, perhaps the first time in years, her face was simply her face. No performance behind it. This is unbelievable. She said, her voice small. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, and set it down. You knew I said no, I stated. I hadn't meant to speak, but the words were there, and I was so tired of swallowing them. I told you last week, when you asked if you could mention the Navy stuff during the toasts, I said no. I told you some of those names carry weight. I asked you to trust me. I kept my voice even. I'd learned that on the flight deck, too. You kept going, I continued, because the room was laughing with you. No one moved. You laughed at the name, I said. I remember the people attached to it. Alara's mouth opened. Nothing came out. And into that silence, from the doorway, came Arthur Maxwell's voice. He had returned quietly, just inside the door, and I don't know how long he'd been standing there. Long enough, I think. What did they call you that for? He asked me, not unkindly, but with genuine curiosity, the way someone asks when they already suspect the answer. Flight deck operations, I replied. USS Liberty. My chief said I moved like I could see things before they happened. Arthur nodded slowly. Then he said something that shifted the temperature of the room once more. There was a woman on our support ship in 78, he began. They called her Riptide. Hospital Corpsman Second Class, Evelyn Carter. He paused. She pulled 2 men out of a flooding compartment during a systems failure off the coast of Okinawa. Nobody told her to. Nobody had time to. She just moved. He looked at Alara. We don't give names like that as jokes. The room was absolutely silent. Alara sat down. My phone buzzed at 11:42 p.m. I was in my hotel room, number 214 at the Hendricks Inn. Yellow lamplight, the distant sound of the courtyard fountain, and I was eating vending machine crackers because the rehearsal dinner had ended 2 hours early and I hadn't finished my salmon. You embarrassed me in front of Leo's family. I read it twice. My phone, lying on the nightstand, buzzed again. I hope you're happy. I stared at the ceiling. I thought about Evelyn Carter, hospital corpsman second class. A woman I had never met. Flooding compartment, off the coast of Okinawa, 1978. I thought about Arthur's face when he'd spoken her name, the specific, particular weight of it, the way you speak of someone who saved a life and whose story you've carried for 40 years. I thought about my chief, Miller, handing me a breakfast burrito and saying, you can't see it coming, and you can't stop it once it's there. I thought about all the times I'd let things pass. I turned the phone face down and went to sleep. The knock came at 7:14 a.m. I know the exact time because I'd been awake since 6, running calculations, how this would go, what I was willing to do and what I wasn't, where my boundaries were, now that I'd finally decided I was allowed to have them. I opened the door. Alara stood there in her bridal robe, an ivory monogrammed silk she'd shown me a photo of 3 months ago when she ordered it. Her makeup was half done, mascara on one eye, foundation stopping abruptly at her jawline. She looked like she'd started getting ready, then stopped, realizing there was something far more urgent to address. I'm sorry if you felt mocked, she said. I looked at her. I looked at her for a long time. That's not an apology, I said. That's a press release. Her jaw tightened. I'm trying. An apology for what you did sounds like, I planned to humiliate you in front of Leo's family. You asked me not to, and I did it anyway because I thought I'd get away with it. That's what happened. That's what you'd be apologizing for. It was one joke. You told Chloe it would kill. I kept my voice level. You workshopped it. She didn't deny it. The fact that she didn't deny it was its own kind of admission. It is my wedding day, she said, her voice softening, an appeal to something older than our argument, to some basic sisterly contract she assumed was still in effect. I know, I said. And I want to be there genuinely. But if you want me standing beside you today, you'll apologize in front of Leo, and Arthur, and Mom, publicly, for what you actually did. Alara went rigid. Absolutely not. Then I won't be your bridesmaid. The silence stretched. I watched her face cycle through several emotions in rapid succession, disbelief, anger, the beginning of a counterargument, and beneath it all, something that might have been genuine hurt. I'd spent 30 years learning to read Alara's face. I knew all the versions. What I saw buried under everything else looked like someone who had done the math and didn't like the answer. Then her phone buzzed. She looked down at the screen, and I watched the blood drain from her face. It's Leo, she whispered. What does he say? She was quiet for a moment, reading. Her eyes moved across the screen twice, once fast, once slow. When she finally looked up, the last traces of the rehearsal dinner's Alara were gone, the smile that had commanded the room, the effortless charm, the certainty that things would arrange themselves around her if she just performed confidently enough. He wants to meet before the ceremony, she said quietly. Just you? She shook her head. He wants Arthur there, too. I found out what happened in that meeting from 3 sources, Leo, Arthur, and eventually, Alara herself, about 6 weeks later in a conversation I'll get to. Leo had spent most of the night talking to his uncle. Arthur Maxwell, lieutenant commander, retired, 23 years as a Navy corpsman, had served with men and women who'd earned names like the one Alara had just turned into a punchline. He'd watched that name stripped of its weight in front of 30 people. And he'd sat with Leo for 2 hours, explaining carefully and without dramatics what he'd seen in me when I'd uttered that word. He'd seen someone who'd learned to hold still when everything was moving. He'd seen someone who'd been asked to laugh along and hadn't. He'd seen the second part of the question Alara never asked, not, what is your nickname, but, what did you do to earn it? Leo, for his part, had been asking himself a different question all night. He'd known about Elara's instinct to perform. He'd thought it was charm. He'd thought the sharper edge of it, the way she sometimes got when she had an audience, was just high spirits, just the version of herself that emerged when she was excited, happy, and feeling good. He was reconsidering whether planning to humiliate her sister and then blaming her sister for the consequences was still within the realm of high spirits. When he texted her that morning, he asked her to come to breakfast. Just them and Arthur. I know what she walked into because Leo told me later, carefully and without editorializing. Arthur had one question for her. He asked it before she'd finished sitting down. When Serena said no to you last week, Arthur said, what did you think she meant? Elara didn't answer right away. I thought she was being oversensitive, she finally said. About a name she earned. About a joke. Arthur looked at her for a long time. I've known a lot of people who use that word, he said. Joke. It's remarkable how much ground it's expected to cover. Leo said Elara started to cry then. Real crying. Not the kind she deployed in arguments, the strategic kind, but the kind that comes when someone who has been very certain for a very long time encounters something immovable. Arthur didn't comfort her. He let her sit with it. Then he said, there's a version of this marriage that works. But it requires you to decide whether your husband gets to have a family you haven't approved, and whether your sister gets to have a life you haven't edited. Elara wiped her eyes. What if I can't do that, she said. Then you find that out now, Arthur said, instead of in 5 years. The wedding happened. I want to be clear about that, because I think a part of you, the part that came here wanting a blow-up, a cancelled wedding, a disaster, might be bracing for something else. The wedding happened. Elara walked down the aisle. She was beautiful. Leo was crying before she was halfway there, the good kind of crying, the kind that makes everyone else in the room realize this is real. I stood in my place, second bridesmaid, green dress, nude heels, small bouquet of white ranunculus. But before we'd gone to the venue, before hair and makeup and buttonholes and all the choreography of the day, Elara had knocked on my hotel room door a second time. 7:48 a.m. I know because I'd never gone back to sleep. She was still in the robe. No more makeup attempt. Her eyes were red. Can I come in? She said. I stepped back from the door. She sat on the edge of the bed. I sat in the chair by the window. We were quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that's been a long time building, the kind that has weight to it. I planned it, she said. You were right. I thought it would be funny, and I thought you'd just laugh along because that's what you do. That's what you've always done. I knew you'd said no, she continued, I knew that, and I did it anyway because I thought. She stopped. I thought the room laughing would make it fine. I thought that if enough people laughed, then it couldn't be mean. It was just a joke, and you'd have to let it go. She looked at her hands. I've been doing that my whole life, she said. Getting people to laugh so I don't have to be accountable. I thought about all the versions of this conversation we'd never had. All the years of, just let it pass. Serena, you're so sensitive. Serena, she didn't mean it. Serena. All the corners I'd been backed into and then blamed for inhabiting. I know, I said. I'm sorry, she said. Not if you felt. I'm sorry for what I did. It was. Her voice wavered. It was cruel, and it was premeditated. And I'm sorry. The room was very quiet, save for the fountain in the courtyard. Okay, I said. Okay. It doesn't fix everything, I clarified. We've got years of this behind us, and one conversation doesn't fix years, but it's a start. She nodded. Arthur asked Leo something this morning, she said. He asked if Leo thought I could change. What did Leo say? He said he thought I could, if I wanted to. She looked up. He said the question was whether I wanted to. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, the way you sometimes can't when you're caught in old patterns, trapped in the grooves of who you've always been to each other. She looked exhausted, younger than she had in years, and more like herself than she'd been in that white dress with the champagne glass, which sounds like a contradiction, but isn't. Do you? I asked. Want to? She was quiet for a long time. I think so, she said. I think I've just. She stopped again. I got very good at a version of myself that I don't think I actually like. I have to tell you about Arthur, because this story isn't complete without him. After the reception, after the first dances and the toasts and the cake and the whole long, beautiful afternoon, I found him sitting outside on the venue's back terrace. He had a glass of water, watching the sun do something extravagant over the hills. I sat next to him. We were quiet for a while, the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. Thank you, I said eventually. For last night. He waved it off, the way older men do, a small, dismissive gesture that means, don't mention it, but also, somehow, of course. What was her name? I asked. The woman you mentioned. Evelyn Carter? He smiled just slightly. She'd hate Evelyn. Katie, they called her. What happened to her? Retired in '89, lives in Pensacola, has about 9 grandchildren and a feud with her HOA about the color of her fence. He looked at me sideways. She's fine. She turned out fine. I thought about that. A hospital corpsman second class from 1978, a flooding compartment off the coast of Okinawa. 40 plus years, 9 grandchildren, and an HOA dispute. Did you keep in touch? I asked. Christ, no, he said, looking back at the sunset. Some things you don't let go of. Not because they haunt you, but because they mattered. We sat for a while longer. You moved like her, he said. Last night, when everything went sideways, the way you held still. He paused. That's not nothing. No, I said. It's not. He nodded. We watched the sun go down. 6 weeks after the wedding, Elara called me on a Tuesday evening. Not a text, an actual call, which in our family was reserved for emergencies or, apparently, something like this. She said she'd started seeing a therapist, Dr. Vivian Hayes. She said the name deliberately, like she was trying to make herself accountable to it. She said she'd spent the first 2 sessions mostly crying about our childhood, and Dr. Hayes had told her that the humor she'd weaponized her whole life was a coping mechanism that had calcified into a weapon, and that she'd spent so long getting people to laugh that she'd forgotten how to get them to trust her instead. She asked me when I stopped trusting you, Elara said. What did you say? I said I wasn't sure I'd ever started. A pause. She said that was the most honest thing I'd said in 2 sessions. I didn't say anything. I don't know how to do this, Elara said. She searched for the word. The version where I actually tell you what's going on, where I don't make it a performance. I know, I said. Me neither. We never learned how. Mom was useless on that front. Yeah. A long pause, comfortable though, newer than our usual silences. Will you teach me, she said. How to do the... She almost laughed. God, this sounds absurd, but how to hold still the way you did at the rehearsal dinner. I thought about Chief Miller and his breakfast burrito. I thought about the flight deck of the Liberty, the wind, the noise, the controlled choreography of extraordinary danger made routine by practice. I thought about a woman named Katie Carter, flooding compartment, Okinawa, 1978, who turned out fine. Yeah, I said. I can do that. She didn't stop being my sister. She's still working on stopping being the version of herself she learned to survive with. Arthur Maxwell sent me a Christmas card in December. Inside, he'd written one line, some currents leave marks on the seafloor. That's not damage. That's evidence of force. I have it on my refrigerator. That's where it's going to stay.